Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Perfect Single Player Storage. I would usually indicate that this is episode 6, however, I think it'll probably end up being episode 5.5 just because it's more of a verge off of the actual series. The main reason why I actually even ended up verging this episode off from the episode before, where I could have added it onto, was because I kind of wanted to separate the feedback for basically everything else that I showed in the episode versus what I'm going to show to you today. It's very important that I get good feedback from you guys because it will kind of determine how things will move going forward, and I think it just made a lot more sense to split it up. I did give a little peek of this interface on the previous episode, but we're going to break it down today, show you some of the components behind it. Maybe some of these things will change in the final product, but I think at the moment what I've got here is pretty solid, unless your feedback is something that I will end up taking into account, in which case maybe we will end up changing some of the stuff here. So just as a quick recap of how the system works, for any people who don't really know, the system works on two things. Items will go into shulker boxes and loose boxes will go into the chest here. Essentially, the way it would work is when you initially head to the interface, you go to the box, left shift and click all the items into the shulker box. Obviously, if you drag it over a shulker box itself, it won't go into the box anyway, so it makes like transferring of items really easy. I think this was initially, again, I've mentioned before, a system that was initially thought out by cubic meter. I'm not 100% sure. Let's just say it is for now. Anyway, so the items in here go into the box. You can then break box and it will be replaced. The box ends up in the buffer chest at the bottom, and then you can place the rest of the shulker boxes in here. You then can choose, if you're happy with that, to go ahead and press the button and send that over to the main buffer, which is indicated at the top here. So I mentioned before that I'm going to keep everything stored in buffers for when I'm actually ready to process the boxes. I don't know if I want to necessarily sort everything the moment that I've put everything into from here and then exited it into where it needs to go. So for me at the moment, it's keeping itself in a buffer. So if I go ahead and press this button, you should see this redstone lamp go on, which means it has actually been fed into the first buffer. So these lights here are indicators of double chests. Each one of these indicators represents a double chest of its own and light up depending on fill levels of the double chest. For example, redstone lamp number 1 and 2 will both be lit up as soon as any items enter them, so no matter what the fill levels are, they'll be lit up from the get-go. Redstone lamp number 3, however, runs slightly differently, and this is actually going to be indicated once the double chest reaches fill level 13. Or the fill level 13 based off of a comparator. There's a reason for this which I'll get to a little bit later on. It'll make a lot more sense as to why we do that. So that's our indicator buffers there. Again, once these are filled, I can then choose whether I want to process it straight away or not. I can always process it at smaller amounts or once the whole thing is full. The reason why we don't process them straight away is mainly because maybe if I'm running this on a single player on a non-server, for example, and I don't have time to sort it at the time, we can leave it in buffers. Alternatively, even if I run it on a server and I could run it at any point, it could be for multiple reasons like saving MSPT. I might be running another farm that's a little bit heavy on the server and I don't want anything to crash or cause any problems, so I can just choose to go ahead and do that a little bit later down the line. So now if we move over to the redstone lamps on this side, you can see we have a couple options available. The first one being the start sort button. Now let's say for example I'm happy to proceed, I can go ahead and press the button here, and that will then decide what actually happens to the boxes going forward. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail in a second. On the button to the right we have a chunk loading grid button. Now actually how the system is going to work is once I press the start sort button, the chunk loading grid should start on its own anyway and should only turn off a good amount of time after everything's been unloaded, all the items have been unloaded. Now, the reason we have a chunk loading button here, a manual one, is because of all the other stuff that we'll have that's going to be needing loading that isn't the storage system itself. A couple examples will be the brewer and the furnace array. Now, what would be a good idea potentially is to have the furnace array and the brewer have their own separate chunk loading grids, but because of the spacing of the actual farm itself, it might be a little bit difficult. This is another reason why we want to make sure that we lock as many hoppers as we can when it's idle, because that way we're going to try, even if we have to load the entire area up with the entire chunk loading grid just to use the furnace array or the brewer, it's going to hopefully not cause too much pressure on the MSPT of the server or your single player computer, whatever it is. Directly above these two indicators here, you have 4 separate indicators for the trunk loading grid. These 4 redstone lamps here will indicate each one of their own trunk loaders, and they will basically be indicators to make sure that we can understand whether a trunk loader is working or not. The reason for this is usually because of a crash. Now, if the server crashes or my single player crashes for any reason, we're going to have bigger problems than just the trunk loaders turning off, mainly being the unloading system we're going to use is probably going to bonk really hard. But we would at least like to have some indicators of things that we can control, like the trunk loading system. If it unloads at the wrong time and the whole system basically doesn't start up as it should do, we'll have an indicator of that. It'll make repairing things a little bit easier. What might potentially change in the future is that this system here might end up on this side here. I'll get rid of this button altogether, and I can manually load a single trunk loader depending on what needs to be loaded, e.g. the furnace array or the brewer. Alternatively, I could just have that the furnace array or the brewer requests to turn on the trunk loading array depending on which section it's in, and that way I don't even really need to press manual trunk loading again, unless there's another thing that I can think of that might require it. Although at this point in time, I don't think I really can think of anything anyway. Now that I think about it though, I do feel like that might be a better option to have them request trunk loader themselves, as opposed to manually loading it myself. But I think I'll think about that a little bit further down the line. On the side here, you can see the full box return. This is basically going to be if I have any full boxes, instead of having them being auto sorted through box loaders and so on. Obviously, there's multiple reasons again why this is a situation. Number one, you can never decide if a full box actually is in the bulk storage down at the bottom there, or whether it's just a full box of items that go into chest storages. And ultimately, you can never really decide whether a box actually is completely full of one item. It's unlikely that it would be. Obviously, I'm here to keep the things in check because it's single player. I can try and keep into consideration that there'd only be one item type in a full box. However, it's easier just to remove all the full boxes later on when I can be bothered, put it into a little buffer chest here again, and then I can sort it manually. The reason why we have indicators again is just to let me know when things are full. And when I have items in them, that way I know I have to keep on top of keeping it the full boxes sorted. If, for example, if for any reason I can't be bothered to do it at the time when I actually go and put it in the chest, it's not a big deal. Really easy to sort full boxes because in most cases, if you have a full box, there'll probably be a few of the same item type. Manually loading them into a storage system should be fairly easy. The idea of why I'm trying to keep the storage system relatively small and compact is so traveling around there and moving around the storage system is going to be relatively easy. You don't want to have to move around your storage system too much. I find that counterproductive to a storage system. And that basically breaks down the entirety of all the indicators that you see in front of us. The only one I didn't mention was the one next to the shulker box down there, and I already demonstrated that at the beginning of the video, so it should have been pretty self-explanatory. So now let's have a little look at the back end of the system here so we can get a better idea of how things are actually going to get processed. Now when you get around the back here, it does seem like a lot. However, keep into consideration that a lot of this is basically just dropper lines that are transporting items. If I got rid of the dropper lines, it would seem a little bit less chaotic, but ultimately that's what mainly everything here is. So let's start off by having a look at the first process of the box sorting. So ultimately, we're going to keep the box and item splitter that we had originally. I know I made a joke about this before, but we're going to go ahead and keep this. So again, the boxes are broken into a stream here, which goes directly into the buffer chest at the top. Items are once again sent over into this shulker box, which allows them to drip through to this double chest. Having a look over here, we have a precision box loader. This is a mixed precision box loader that I designed. The reason why we're using a precision mixed box loader as opposed to just a normal box loader is because we want to make sure we always collect these boxes. They could have valuables in them that we don't ever want to lose. It's not like a farm that outputs thousands of the same item. If you lose a couple here and there, it's no big deal. In this case, we might have something important that we don't want to lose. This system, and along with the rest of the system, is completely dustless as well. This is basically the only actual piece of dust, and it doesn't change signal strength. Only stays at signal strength 4 because we're going to make sure that there's at least 2 items backed up in the system here before we try and break the box. And this is looking for the reason we chose signal strength 4 is mainly because of unstackables. It will be 2 unstackables that will end up in this hopper that will trigger the system to lock this hopper to stop any items to coming through, and then break the box, place a new one, empty out this hopper here, and then unlock it for more of the system for more of the items to come through. We only have a single double chest worth of item buffer over here because ultimately I really should, in most cases, only ever have like a double chest worth of items that I chuck mistakenly even into the system. I should really never really even need the system, but it is there just in case. I will demonstrate this mixed box loader to you really quickly. So I will set this up just so it's ready to break. So we can see here I've frozen the game just for now. The box is completely full. Nothing's going to trigger. We'll go ahead and put in a whole bunch of diamond boots. You can see the items are mixed here. What we'll do is we will tick step at a time. So we'll do tick step 10. We should now be able to see the box break in action. So we'll tick step slowly. And you can see the box was broken and unlocked at the hopper was unlocked in the same tick. You can see the box has already been collected here. And if we tick step a couple of times, the hopper's already locked again. When the next box is placed, the hopper will make sure it will remain locked. And in this scenario, you'll see that any of the items that go through will no longer have to worry about trickle-down effect into the hopper below. Here we go. Give it another tick step. Maybe a couple more. I guess not. I'm assuming there's a hopper cooldown. There we go. The items have plenty of time to end up in the shulker box and not trickle through to the bottom part here. You can see the broken box is sent into the same dropper line as the remainder of the boxes. It does use the same system here. So what happens is the boxes will be sent into this dropper. This dropper will then activate the rest of the line as opposed to activating the entire line from the bottom over here. Even if there's two boxes that end up in the hopper at the same time, or in this dropper at the same time, apologies. If it ends up in the hot dropper at the same time, it double pulses every single time anyway, so the boxes should end up at the top either way. We shouldn't see any conflicting issues. Once all the boxes have been processed, they end up here into this buffer chest and the following three. So all three of these here, I can grab myself some glass. These three here are buffer chests that they'll end up in. All three have their indicators hooked up to these lines here. The first one is indicated by this line, then this line, and then the final one at the top will be indicated by this line here. Now I mentioned to you earlier that we're detecting the final chest via signal strength 13 as opposed to full or empty or whatever it is. The reason we use signal strength 13 specifically is because it's close enough to being full where we're not actually wasting the entirety of the double chest's fill level. And the reason we don't put it as empty or half full or with one item in there is because ultimately then I'll be have a warning indicator based on the fact that this is, the buffer's so-called full, and actually it's only really just got one or two items in here, in which case I'm rushed to unload it. It's not a big deal, just as a reminder for myself. Now, the reason we chose 13 again as opposed to full is because, let's say for example, now I'll have to set this up a little bit, so let's go ahead and fill up all of these double chests here, because it's going to be kind of a little semi-simulation to give us an idea. In fact, let's go ahead and do something like this. Now you'll see this drop back off from signal strength 13, fantastic. Now let's say for example you have just under signal strength 13, so I think this box here will pull it over to 13. So if we get rid of that, let's say for example I then come along, I then want to chuck in another double chest worth of shulker boxes into the system. What's going to happen is, similarly if you had used a water stream or if you're using a dropper line, the items will be spat into here. It will then realize I'm at signal strength 15 or whatever it was, and then I'd realize the final double chest was full. In that case, what would happen is I would end up with items backed up into the dropper line, or if they were coming through a water stream, they would just end up despawning because they wouldn't go through the hopper. One solution would be to add another double chest, which is a possibility and something I'll consider. That way I will know that the buffer chest is full and then some. Alternatively, what I've done here is to add a lock in the system. This line here basically would lock the hopper input if we reach the signal strength and there are still items coming in. So let's go ahead and put that into the buffer. Items will come into the buffer. That's full. This has now realized that, okay, the system's full. What's going to happen now is that we're not going to have any of the items buffered into the hopper behind, so it's picked up a few of them, even with the delay of the signal getting passed on. One has reached the hopper, but that's okay, we don't have to worry about that too much anymore. And the other items are now backed up in the system, so they're still locked in here, not allowing to transfer through. There is one slight issue with this, which I'll try and figure out later on, which is that one item always ends up in the hopper. Now, I think maybe adding a delay would help, because so far every time I've done it, it's always had one in there. Maybe a 1 tick delay is the magic number that allows the system to recognize it. I'll double check it over. This is a slight flaw with it, but I can remove that as well and maybe try and add an extra access point on the side for that. But now in this case, what I can do is go ahead and remove these boxes, realize that I've actually gone over on my overflow, and go ahead and start to process these. That would probably be the best thing to do in this scenario. The next step in the process would basically be to decipher whether or not it's a full box or a partially filled box. Again, full boxes will be split into this section here. Now, what we can do is go ahead and simulate the whole thing. So I've got ourselves a couple things here. We've got ourselves some items. In fact, just for fun's sake, go ahead and do that. So we've got ourselves some unstackables, some stackables. We've got ourselves some full boxes, and we've got ourselves some empty boxes here. So go ahead and rearrange that. In fact, let's go ahead and do this just to get a better idea of how many we have of each item. We're not actually going to be dealing with empty boxes in this system per se. We could add a empty system tracker. That's actually processed by the unloading system that we look at later on. So empty boxes will also be processed as partially filled boxes. In fact, I'll go ahead and chuck one of those in my system too, or in my inventory. So you can see we've got an empty. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we should have 6 boxes that go into the half empties, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 boxes that end up in here. The rest of these items should all be processed into the mixed item loader. Now remember, this is the naughty Shady who shouldn't be putting items in here originally. We'll go ahead and process that. Should already start to see the items are coming through in here. There we go. So we've got all the items come through. That's all been sorted. We should now have 1, 2, if we give this a sort again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 full boxes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 non-full and empty box here. That's all done. So what we're going to do to separate all these is use a is empty or is full in this case that me and Boyan, mostly Boyan, designed quite a little while back. Isn't huge, doesn't use any dust, mostly observer based. It's pretty much this little section over here. This is going to split it up. Full items will go into this system here and end up in that double chest that we saw earlier. We'll go ahead and put a double chest for this item here as well. This will just end up in a water stream or something, or another drop line later. In fact, that line will be the most important one, because that will be the ones that actually end up getting sent over to the system for processing. We'll deal with that later on once we put the whole thing together. So we can see indicators on. Let's go ahead and process the system. So that should be everything. So we can see 6 boxes here. 5 that are full, 1 that's empty. That's all the non-filled boxes. Go ahead and break that. And then over here, we should have the remainder of the 7 boxes that we have that are all completely full. So that, my friends, is the entire interface that we'll be using for our storage system. Again, maybe there'll be some changes to it. If someone does want to take the thing off of me and kind of optimize the whole thing, someone who's really a little bit more well versed in storage tech would be great. Someone who can compact it, get rid of some of the junk on there, that would be cool. Other than that, I think this will probably be all of it. And I actually also think this will probably be the end of the episode. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you on the next storage video, and hopefully we can try and finally start getting things together. And I'll probably hope to stop saying that